The smell of linseed oil and turpentine is the smell of sanity. It's the scent of creation, of focus, of a world distilled down to pigment and canvas. For the past 6 months, that smell had been the only thing keeping me grounded. My entire life, my entire future, was contained within the four walls of the small corner of the living room I had converted into my studio. It was all for the Sheridan grant. The Sheridan isn't just a scholarship, it's the scholarship. Full tuition for my senior year at the Institute. A solo exhibition at the prestigious Art and Gallery downtown, and a $10,000 stipend. It's the kind of opportunity that takes a fledgling art student and turns them into a professional artist overnight. It's a kingmaker, and I wanted it more than I wanted to breathe. My collection, titled Urban Hymns, was almost complete. 5 large-scale oil paintings that captured the quiet, overlooked moments of beauty in the city. A reflection of a rain-slicked street at midnight, the lonely glow of a laundromat, the geometric dance of fire escapes on an old brick building. They were the best work I had ever done. Each one was a piece of my soul rendered. In cadmium yellow and ultramarine blue, I poured every ounce of my being into them. I was exhausted, perpetually broke, and running on fumes. But I was close. So damn close. Liam, are you even listening to me? The voice, sharp and laced with digital static, shattered my concentration. I flinched, nearly dropping the palette knife I was using to mix a delicate shade of gray. I turned towards the source of the noise. Maya, my roommate. She was sprawled on the couch on the other side of the living room, her own makeshift command center. If my world was one of quiet contemplation and slow, meticulous, hers was a chaotic explosion of neon lights and electronic noise. She was a semi-pro gamer, an aspiring esports champion, and her setup was a monument to her ambition. A massive, curved monitor dominated the space, flanked by speakers. The tower of her gaming PC sat on the floor beside her, like a holy relic, its internals glowing with an obnoxious, pulsing rainbow of LED lights. A headset was clamped over her ears, one side pushed back so she could yell at me. I said I have the regional qualifiers this weekend. Hay repeated, her eyes glued to the screen where colorful characters were engaged in some frantic, magical battle. So you need to be likey, extra quiet. No weird? Art fumes, no loud music, no. Whatever it is you do over there. I'm painting, Maya, I said through gritted teeth. It's what I'm always doing. And my fumes are nan-toxic. We've been over this. Yeah, well, they smell intense, she retorted, not looking. At me, it throws off my focus. I turned back to my canvas, my hand tight on the palette knife. This was our life. A constant, low-grade war between two worlds that should never have been forced to coexist. I needed silence and stillness. She thrived on chaos and noise. I saw the world in light and shadow. She saw it in frame rates and kill-to-death ratios. We were oil and water. Or, more accurately, oil, paint, and whatever. Sugary, caffeinated sludge she drank from those giant, garishly colored cans that were always littered around her side of the room. The only reason we were roommates was desperation. The student housing market was a nightmare, and this cheap, dingy 2-bedroom apartment was the only thing we could find on short notice. We had a truce, an unspoken agreement, to mostly ignore each other's existence. But as the deadline for the Sheridan loomed and her tournament schedule intensified, our two worlds were colliding more and more frequently. I tried to ignore her to find my focus again. I picked up my finest brush, dipped it in the perfect shade of gray, and leaned into the canvas. I was working on the final piece, the centerpiece of the collection, study of an old woman sitting on a park bench, her face a roadmap of a long life. The late afternoon sun casting long, gentle shadows. This was the most delicate part, capturing the quiet dignity in her eyes. No, no. Maya suddenly shrieked, her voice cracking with fury. Are you kidding me? It was one shot. One shot. I jumped, a streak of gray paint skittering across the old woman's cheek. I swore under my breath, my heart hammering. "This is bullshit," she screamed, ripping the headset off her head and slamming it onto the floor. Her face was contorted in a mask of pure rage. Her character on the screen had apparently been defeated. To her, it was the end of the world. "Maya, for the love of God, can you?" But I never finished the sentence. In a fit of theatrical, childish rage, she swiped her arm across the end table next to her. The target of her fury was an empty chip bag, but her wild swing connected with a full open can of Viper Strike, her energy drink of choice. The can, a monstrous 24-ounce vessel of fluorescent green liquid, went airborne. It happened in slow motion, a perfect, sickening arc. It spun through the air, a comet of sticky, neon death, and landed with a deafening crash right in the middle of my workspace. It hit my easel first, toppling it. The painting of the old woman, my masterpiece, my hope, crashed face down onto the floor. But that wasn't the worst of it. The can exploded on impact. A wave of that vile green liquid erupted outwards, splashed across the 4 other canvases that were leaning against the wall, drying. It drenched my palette, my expensive brushes, my neatly organized tubes of paint, a sticky, corrosive tidal wave of sugar and chemicals. For a moment, I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just stared at the devastation. The room was silent now, save for the fizzing, popping sound of the carbonated drink eating into 6 months of my life. The sweet, artificial smell of green apple filled the air, overpowering the scent of my sanity. It was the smell of absolute ruin. The silence stretched for an eternity. Maya stood frozen, her face a mask of shock, her gamer rage instantly extinguished by the sheer scale of the disaster she had caused. The green liquid was everywhere, pooling on the floor, dripping from my canvases, soaking into the wood of my brush handles. It was a toxic swamp in the middle of my sacred space. Slowly, deliberately, I walked forward and knelt down. My hands were trembling as I reached for the painting that had fallen face down. I turned it over. It's the old woman's. Face was gone. In its place was a grotesque smear of wet paint, distorted and ruined. A large dark stain was already spreading across the canvas where the drink had soaked through, the chemicals dissolving the gesso primer. It was unsalvageable, completely unsalvageable. I gently laid it down and looked at the others. They were still standing, but each one had been hit. Great weeping streaks of green ran down the surface of the rain-slicked street. The lonely laundromat now looked like it was slimed by a ghost. The chemicals were already reacting with the oils, creating a bizarre bubbly texture. They were all destroyed. Every single one. Hundreds of hours of work. Thousands of dollars in materials. Gone in 5 seconds of childish fury. "Oh my God," Maya whispered, her voice small. "Liam, A sound escaped my throat. It was a low, guttural noise that didn't feel human. The grief and shock were being consumed by a wave of pure, white-hot rage that was so intense it made me dizzy. I stood up slowly and turned to face her. "You," aside, my voice dangerously quiet. "What? You what? You're sorry? You didn't mean to?" "It was an accident." Haste Marie, taking a step back. She looked scared. Good she should be. An accident, a loghead, a harsh, ugly sound. You throwing a tantrum like a 5-year-old because you lost your little video game is not an accident. It's a character flaw. I swept my arm out, gesturing to the sticky green graveyard of my future. This is what that looks like. Do you have any idea what you've done? They're just paintings, Liam/sighed. And her words, meant to be placating, were like throwing gasoline on a fire. You can just paint them again, right? It's just paintings. The phrase echoed in the roaring cavern of my skull. My vision tunneled. All I could see was her face, her complete and utter lack of understanding, of empathy, of respect. Paint them again. He spread, taking a step towards her. She flinched. That was 6 months of my life, Maya. That was every spare dollar I had in the world. Those brushes, I pointed to the rack of sable brushes, now drowning in green goo, are $300. Each. The paint you just ruined is handmade, imported from Belgium. The canvases were custom stretched. This is over $5,000 worth of materials. Not to mention the 6 months of work that I can never get back. The Sheridan deadline is in 3 weeks. Her eyes widened at the dollar amount. I saw the calculation on her face, the dawning horror, not of what she'd done to me, but of what it might cost her. 5,000? She squeaked. No way. You're making that up, am I? Sighed, my voice dripping with venom. I have the receipts, Maya. For every single tube of paint, for every brush. You are going to pay for this. For every last cent. She crossed her arms, a defensive-y, petulant look returning to her face. The brief moment of remorse was gone, replaced by self-preservation. I'm not paying you $5,000. That's insane. It's a hobby, Liam. You can't expect me to pay for your expensive hobby. A hobby. She had called my life's work, my passion, my future, a hobby. Something inside me broke. The rage vanished, and in its place was a cold, terrifying calm. It was the kind of calm that comes when all hope is lost. The kind of calm that allows for terrible, crystal-clear decisions. I looked at her, standing there in her stupid e-sports team hoodie, a smudge of cheese dust on her cheek. I looked at her command center, at the glowing, pulsating machine that was her god, her passion, her career, the tool of her trade, her equivalent of my brushes, my paints, my canvases. It's an idea formed in my mind. It was ugly, it was vindictive, and it felt like perfect, righteous justice. An eye for an eye, a tool for a tool. You're right, aside, my voice completely devoid of emotion. The sudden shift in my demeanor seemed to confuse her. You're absolutely right. Don't worry about the money. I'll figure it out myself. She eyed me suspiciously. Really? Really? Aside, turning my back on her in the wreckage, I'm going to go for a walk, clear my head. I walked out of the apartment without another word, the sickeningly sweet smell of her carelessness clinging to my clothes. I didn't go for a walk. I went to the library and I sat down at a computer and began my research. High-end custom gaming PC buyers. Sell used esports equipment NYC. Urgent cash for computer components. She was leaving for her tournament in Philadelphia tomorrow morning. She would be gone for 2 full days. It was more than enough time. She had taken my future. I was going to take hers, and then I was going to sell it. The next morning, I watched from my bedroom window as Maya loaded her gear into a friend's beat-up Honda. She had her keyboard, her mouse, her headset, all packed into specialized, padded cases. She treated them with the reverence I reserved for my art supplies. The irony was so thick I could taste it. She glanced up at our apartment window, her expression unreadable, before getting in the car. As it drove away, a profound sense of calm settled over me. It was time. I walked into the living room. The sticky green mess was still there, a testament to her crime. I ignored it. I had bigger things to deal with. I walked over to her side of the room, to the altar of her ambition. The massive PC tower sat on the floor, silent and dark. It was a custom-built machine, a Frankenstein's monster of the most expensive components on the market. She had bragged about it endlessly for months. It's the overclocked processor, the dual graphics cards, the liquid cooling system. She called it the Leviathan. She claimed it was worth over $6,000. Had it made. A call last night, a man named Sal, whose website was discreet, but whose reviews were stellar. He specialized in buying high-end niche electronics. No questions asked. Cash only. He had quoted me a price range over the phone based on my description of the components that made my breath catch. This was more than enough. Sal arrived less than an hour later. He was a short, stout man, wheat nimble fingers and K-serp, appraising eyes of a pawnbroker. He didn't speak much. He simply knelt beside the machine, unscrewed the side panel, and peered. Inside, with a small flashlight, humming to himself. That evening, I moved all my new supplies into the studio. I set up my easel, I laid out my paints. The space smelled of fresh plaster and old wood. There was no trace of artificial green apple. There was no buzzing of electronics. There was only quiet. Perfect, bountiful, creative quiet. I had my sanctuary. I had my materials. I had a chance. The Sheridan was still within reach. I had taken a terrible, desperatic gembly, and it had paid off. But as I stood there in my perfect, quiet studio, a wave of profound dread washed over me. Maya was coming home on Sunday night. And when she did, the beautiful quiet was going to be shattered by a storm of her own making. And I had no idea if I would be able to survive it. I spent the next 2 days in a creative frenzy. Hiding in my new studio, I worked with a manic energy I had never experienced before. The fear of Maya's impending return was a fire at my back, forcing me forward. I sketched out the compositions for my 5 paintings, working from the memory and the reference photos I still had on my laptop. The act of creating was a drug, a way to numb the gnawing guilt and terror that were churning in my stomach. This was right, I told myself over and over again. It was justice, an eye for an eye. She destroyed my tools, so I sold hers. It was a perfectly balanced equation of revenge. But no matter how many times I repeated the mantra, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had unleashed something terrible. I had escalated a conflict, and I had no idea what her countermove would be. I returned to the apartment late Sunday afternoon, just a few hours before she was due back. I needed to shower and grab some clothes. The apartment felt eerie and silent. Her side of the room was still a gaping wound. I quickly cleaned up the sticky, dried remnants of the energy drink, scrubbing the floor until it was clean. I didn't do it for her. I did it for me. Couldn't stand to look at the evidence of my own victimhood anymore. I was erasing the crime that had justified my own. I was in my bedroom when I heard the key in the lock. My heart leaped into my throat. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. This was it. I heard her drop her bags by the door. "Liam," she called out, her voice tired from her trip. "I'm back. And I actually didn't totally suck this time. Made it to the quarterfinals." I didn't answer. I just stood in the shadows of my room, listening. There was a long silence. I could picture her walking into the living room, stretching, probably heading for the couch, and then I heard it. A sharp, confused intake of breath. "What the?" Her voice was a low murmur. I heard her footsteps, quick and frantic now. "What the hell, Liam? Where's my stuff? Where's my rig?" I took a deep breath and walked out of my room to face her. She was standing in the empty space, spinning in a slow circle, her face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. Her eyes were wide, scanning the bare wall, the empty floor, as if the sheer force of her will could make her precious. Machine reappear. She saw me and her eyes narrowed. "Liam, what happened? Did we get robbed?" For a split second, I was tempted. I could lie. I could play dumb. It was the coward's way out. "Okay, you do." But looking at her, at the genuine panic on her face, I knew I couldn't. My act of revenge was pointless if she didn't know it was me. It needed to be a message. "No," a sigh, my voice calm and even. "We didn't get robbed." Understanding crashed over her face, followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated fury. Her expression was terrifying. Was the same rage I'd seen the day she'd lost her match. Boot these, Timmy. It wasn't directed at a video game. It was directed at me. "You say we spared," her voice trembling with rage. "You did this. Where is it? Where is my computer?" "I sold it," I said simply. The words hung in the air between us, stark and irrevocable. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. It was as if she couldn't process the information. Then, a guttural scream ripped. From her throat, it was a sound of pure agony and fury. "You what?" Say shrieked, taking a step towards me. Her hands clenched into fists. "You sold it. Are you insane?" That was my life. That was everything. And my paintings were my life. I yelled back, my own anger flaring, up to meet hers. My supplies were everything. I mean, you destroyed them and you didn't give a damn. You called my future a hobby, Maya, so I sold your hobby to pay for mine. That was a $6,000 machine. She screamed, her face inches from mine. That was my career, my sponsorships, everything. You can't just sell someone's career? You thought you could destroy mine, I retorted, standing my ground. You stood there in the middle of the wreckage of my portfolio, and you refused to take any responsibility. You offered me nothing. No apology, no money, nothing. What did you expect me to do? I expected you to not be a psychopath. She cried, tears of rage streaming down her face. I'm calling the police. This is theft. Grand larceny. You are going to jail, you son of a bitch. She fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking too much to unlock it. Go ahead, aside, my voice cold as ice. Call them. And when they get here, I'll show them the receipts for the $5,000 worth of my property that you destroyed through criminal negligence. We can share a prison cell. It'll be just like living here. She froze, her thumb hovering over the screen. I saw the conflict in her eyes. She knew I was right. It wasn't a clean case of theft. It was a messy, complicated war. And calling in the authorities would mean mutually assured destruction. It would ruin us both. She lowered the phone, her body trembling with a rage so profound it seemed to have no outlet. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a hatred so pure it was terrifying. It was the look of an enemy, a true enemy. You are going to regret this. Liam screamed, her voice a venomous hiss. You think you've won? You have no idea what I'm capable of. I am going to ruin you. I'm going to destroy your precious little Grant. Your career, everything you love. This isn't over. This has just begun. She turned, grabbed bed hairbags, and stormed into her bedroom, slamming the door so hard a picture fell off the wall in the hallway. I was left alone in the silent, empty living room, my heart hammering against my ribs. The silence I had craved now felt menacing. I had won the battle. But Maya had just declared a war, and she was a much better strategist than I was. The next 48 hours were a tense, silent hell. The apartment became a demilitarized zone. We moved like ghosts, avoiding each other, communicating only through the passive-aggressive slamming of doors and cupboards. The air was thick with unspoken threats. I barely slept, my ears trained for any sound from her room, my mind racing with all the terrible ways she could retaliate. I found my refuge in the studio. It was the only place I felt safe, the only place her toxic anger couldn't reach me. I poured all my anxiety, my fear, and my simmering rage into my work. I stretched the new canvases, pre-med tem, and began the arduous process of recreating my lost world. The light in the studio was perfect. My new brushes felt incredible in my hand, and for hours at a time, I could almost forget the war one had started. I was sketching the composition for the new version of the laundromat painting when my phone started buzzing. And it didn't stop. A relentless, unending stream of notifications. Texts, Instagram comments, Facebook messages. My stomach clenched. This was it. Her first move. I wiped my charcoal-dusted hands on a rag and picked up the phone. The screen was a wall of hatred. A friend had sent me a link. Dude, what did you do? I clicked it. It took me to Maya's Instagram page. She had posted a video. It was filmed in her bedroom. The lighting soft and flattering. Her face was blotchy, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked vulnerable, heartbroken. She was a phenomenal actress. I don't even know how to say. This Hab Began, her voice cracking convincingly. She took a shaky breath. I came home yesterday from my tournament and my entire gaming setup was gone. My PC, my monitors, everything. My roommate, Liam Parker, she said my full name, clear as a bell, sold. He sold it all because he was mad at me over an accident. A stupid spilled drink. She started to cry, fat tears rolling down her cheeks. This wasn't just a computer. This was my life. It was my career. Have sponsorships. I have a team that depends on me. I'm supposed to be competing in the nationals next month. And he took it all away from me. She looked directly into the camera, her eyes pleading. He's an art student at the Institute. If any of you know him, please. I don't know what to do. It's destroyed everything I've worked for. The video was a masterpiece of manipulation. She had framed it perfectly. She was the innocent victim. I was the cruel, vindictive monster. She conveniently left out the part about the $5,000 worth of damage, or the fact that she had called my life's work a hobby. No, in her version, she was the dedicated professional. And I was the hobbyist who had thrown a psychotic tantrum. The comments section was a cesspool. Liam Parker is a psycho. Find this guy and ruin him. What kind of monster sells someone's PC? The Art Institute needs to expel this creep. Her gaming community had been mobilized. They were an army, and she had pointed them directly at me. My social media was flooded with threats. People were sharing my photo, my class schedule. My digital life was being systematically dismantled. I felt exposed, violated, terrified. This was a modern-day witch hunt, and I was the witch. I threw my phone across the studio, a strangled cry of rage and fear escaping my lips. It clattered against the far wall and fell to the floor. I wanted to smash it. Wanted to smash everything? This was her strategy. She wasn't going to fight me in the real world with police and lawyers. That was too messy, too complicated. She was going to fight me where she was strongest, online. She was going to destroy my reputation, turn the entire world against me, and make my life so unbearable I would have no choice but to surrender. I sank to the floor, my head in my hands. The quiet of my studio no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a bunker. The war wasn't just in my apartment anymore. It was everywhere, and I was surrounded. The social fallout was swift and brutal. Walking across campus felt like walking through a gauntlet of hostile stares and whispered insults. People I didn't even know would glare at me in the cafeteria. Maya's video had gone viral in our small university ecosystem. I was no longer Liam Parker, the quiet art student. I was Liam Parker, the PC-stealing psychopath. The worst part was the reaction from our mutual friends. We had a small, tight-knit group that had formed in our freshman year. It was a mix of art students, literature majors, and a couple of engineering nerds. Maya and I were the odd couple of the group, but it had always worked. Now it was fractured. I got a text from my friend Sarah, a photography major. "Liam, I saw Maya's video. Please tell me it's not true." I tried to explain. I told her my side of the story about the ruined paintings. The cost, Maya's refusal to take responsibility. Her reply was hesitant. "I get that you were angry, but selling her rig? That's a lot." She didn't get it. No one did. To them, my paintings were just things. Beautiful, impressible. Maya's PC, on the other hand, was a tool. It was her livelihood. They understood its value in a way they could never understand. The value of a specific/irreplaceable shade of blue. Or the hundreds of hours it took to capture the light in a single brushstroke. In their eyes, I had responded to a misdemeanor with a felony. The nuances were lost. All that remained was Maya's simple, powerful narrative, victim and villain. Our friends tried to stay neutral, but it was impossible. Lunches became awkward. Group chats went silent. Eventually, they were forced to choose sides. And most of them chose Maya. She was the wounded one, the one who needed support. I was the aggressor, the one who had gone too far. I was isolated, an outcast from my own life. The only person who didn't abandon me was my best friend, Chloe. She was a sculpture student, a whirlwind of kinetic energy and fierce loyalty. She stormed into my studio the day after the video dropped, her eyes blazing. "I'm going to kill her," she announced, throwing her bag on the floor. "I'm going to melt down her stupid little gaming trophies and turn them into a sculpture called The Death of 1,000 Nerds." Okay. Despite everything, I laughed. "Please don't," I said. "I'm in enough trouble already." "What she did is disgusting, Liam," Sir sighed, her voice softening as she looked at my pale, exhausted face. "It's a smear campaign, but you need to fight back. Post your own video. Show them the pictures of your ruined stuff." "No," aside, shaking my head. "I can't. It'll just be a he said, she said. She's better at that game than I am. The only way I can fight back is to win the Sheridan. That's the only thing that matters. I just need to finish these paintings." Chloe looked at the new canvases, still in their early stages. "Can you do it? With all this noise?" "I have to." Aside, my voice. "Grim, it's the only way out." But the noise was getting harder and harder to ignore. Kaya's campaign had reached a new level. She had mobilized her online army to do more than just send me nasty messages. They had found the contact information for the Arden Gallery and the Sheridan Grant Committee. They were flooding their inboxes with emails, demanding that I be removed from consideration. They were calling me a thief, a Vendel, a disgrace to the artistic community. It was a brilliant, insidious strategy. She was attacking the very foundation of my future. She was poisoning the well, ensuring that even if I did manage to finish my portfolio, the people judging it would already see me as a monster. I was trying to work, trying to paint the delicate light on a wet street, but my hand was shaking with rage. My mind was a storm of hateful comments and threats. The sanctuary of my studio was no longer immune. The war had breached the walls. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated hatred for her. It was so potent, it almost made me sick. She wasn't just my roommate. She wasn't just my enemy. She was a cancer, eating away at my life, my friendships, my future. I picked up a palette knife and scraped the paint off the canvas in a single, violent motion. Calm, beautiful street scene was gone, replaced by an angry, muddy smear. I couldn't do it. I couldn't create beauty while my world was so full of ugliness. She was winning. She was getting inside my head, destroying my focus and killing the part of me that knew how to paint, the part of me that mattered. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. The subject line was stark and terrifying. "Formal complaint regarding student conduct, urgent meeting required." It was from the office of the Dean of Student Affairs. My heart plummeted into my stomach. Maya had done it. She had taken the fight from the court of public opinion to the official channels of the university. I walked into Dean Albright's office feeling like a man on his way to his own execution. The room was exactly what you'd expect. Dark wood, leather-bound books, a faint smell of old paper and authority. Dean Albright was a stern-looking woman in her 50s with intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. And sitting in the chair opposite her desk, Kay, looking for all the world like a frightened, innocent victim, was Maya. She had dressed for the part. No gamer hoodies or ripped jeans. She wore a simple, conservative blouse and had pulled her hair back. She looked professional, serious. When I walked in, she refused to meet my eyes, instead staring E.T. hair hens which were clasped tightly in her lap. It was a masterful performance. "Mr. Parker," Dean Albright said, her voice neutral. "Please have a seat. Ms. Costa has filed a formal complaint against you. It's a very serious one." She alleges that you stole and sold over $6,000 worth of her personal property. I sat down, my palms sweating. That's not what happened. Aside, my voice sounding weak even to my own ears. Oh, the dean said, raising an eyebrow. And please, enlighten me. Did you or did you not sell Ms. Costa's computer equipment? There was no point in lying. I did, I admitted. But nothing, Maya interrupted, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. He stole it. It's because I accidentally spilled a drink. He's a thief. It's Costa Pliasa, the dean said, holding up a hand. She turned her gaze back to me, was sharp and penetrating. Mr. Parker, theft is an expellable offense at this institution. You are a scholarship student. You are a candidate for the Sheridan Grant. You understand the gravity of this situation? I hope. This was it. My entire future was hanging by a thread in this stuffy, intimidating office. I felt a surge of adrenaline. I would not let her win. Not like this. With all due respect, Dean, aside, forcing myself to meet her gaze. It wasn't theft. It was restitution. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. I'd come prepared. I laid it on her desk. Is a detailed, itemized list of the art supplies and canvases that Ms. Costa destroyed. And these AIADAD laying a thick stack of papers next to it are the receipts. It comes to a total of $5,284. She admitted fault, but she refused to pay for the damages. She called my work, my portfolio for the Sheridan Grant, a hobby, and told me to deal with it myself. The dean's expression flickered. She picked up the list, her eyes scanning the items. Windsor and Newton oil paints, Rosemary & Co., sable brushes, Belgian linen canvases. She wasn't an art expert, but she was smart enough to recognize that this wasn't hobbyist material. She looked at Maya. Ms. Costa sighed, her voice a little colder now. Is this true? Did you cause this damage and refuse to pay for it? Maya squirmed in her seat. Was an accident, she mumbled. I didn't think his stuff was that expensive. So it is true, the dean said, her tone sharp. She turned back to me. Mr. Parker, while I appreciate the context you've provided, it does not change the fact that you took matters into your own hands in a way that is wholly inappropriate. This university does not condone vigilante justice. I understand that, I said, but I was desperate. The deadline for the grant is in 2 weeks. Without those supplies, my chance was gone. I saw no other option. The dean leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen on her desk. She looked from me to Maya, then back again. I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was dealing with 2 headstrong MBTO students, both of whom had acted terribly. Expelling me would be clean, but it would ignore Maya's culpability. Letting us both off would set a bad precedent. Here is what is going to happen, she said finally, her voice leaving no room for argument. This is a civil dispute between 2 roommates. It is not et stege, a matter for university expulsion. However, your behavior, Mr. Parker, has been reprehensible. And yours, Ms. Costa, has been irresponsible and callous. You are both at fault. She looked at me. Mr. Parker, you are hereby placed on strict academic probation for the remainder of the year. Any further infractions? Any complaints? Any hint of trouble? And you will be expelled. No questions asked. Is that clear? Yes, Dean, a mumbled. A wave of relief so intense it almost made me sick washing over me. It wasn't an acquittal, but it wasn't an execution either. She then turned to Maya and Ms. Costa. I suggest you think long and hard about the concept of personal responsibility. The university will not be taking any action against you at this time, but your conduct has been noted, and your smear campaign against Mr. Parker on social media will stop immediately. We do not tolerate harassment or bullying. At this institution, that is also an expellable offense. Maya's face went pale. She hadn't expected her own weapon to be turned against her. She nodded silently. "You are both dismissed," the dean said, her tone final. I walked out of the office, my legs shaking. Maya scurried out behind me. We stood in the hallway for a moment, the air crackling with our mutual hatred. "You got lucky," Sehi said, her voice a low whisper. "But probation means you have to be a perfect little angel. One wrong move, Liam, one toe out of line. And I'll be there to make sure they see it." She walked away, leaving me standing carry, my heart pounding. I had survived. But she was right. I was on a knife's edge. I had to be perfect. And in a war with Maya, perfection was impossible. She had lost the battle in the dean's office, but she had made it clear that she had no intention of losing the war. The dean's ruling, as much of a relief as it was, did nothing to solve the fundamental problem. I was still at war, but now I was a soldier with his hands tied behind his back. Maya, true to her word, took down the incriminating video, but the damage was done. The whispers and stares continued. And the truce in our apartment was colder than ever. She had stopped her overt attacks, but she had become a master of psychological warfare. It was the small things, the subtle, deniable acts of sabotage that would slowly chip away at my sanity. I'd come home to find the freezer. Door left slightly ajar, the contents half thawed. "Oops," she'd say with a saccharine smile. It must not have closed properly. My half of the pantry would be infested with ants. Drawn by a strategically spilled line of sugar she'd left behind the bread box. The internet would mysteriously cut out for hours at a time, always when I was trying to upload reference photos for my work. The router must be acting up again. She'd call out from her room where I knew she was secretly using her phone as a hotspot. Each incident was small enough to be plausible deniability. But together, they formed a pattern of relentless, low-grade harassment. She was trying to make me snap. She knew I was on probation. She was baiting me, waiting for me to lose my temper to yell. To do something she could record and take straight to the dean. My own apartment had become a minefield. The pressure was taking a devastating toll on my work. We're spending every possible moment in the studio, but my paintings were suffering. I was trying to recreate my lost collection, but the new pieces felt hollow. They were technically proficient, but they lacked the soul, the quiet joy of the originals. The laundromat looked sterile. The rain-slicked street felt cold and dead. My hands knew how to make the shapes, how to mix the colors, but my heart wasn't in it. All I could feel was anger, paranoia, and a depth, gnawing exhaustion. I was staring at the lifeless canvas of the old woman on the park bench, my fourth attempt at capturing her expression, and all I could see was a blank face. I couldn't remember her quiet dignity. I couldn't remember the feeling of that late afternoon sun. All I had was the ghost of a memory, and it wasn't enough. In a moment of desperation, I packed up one of the failed canvases and took it to my mentor, Professor Alistair Finch. Finch was the head of the painting department, a brilliant artist in his own right, and the chair of the Sheridan Grant Committee. He was a kind, eccentric man with paint-stained fingers and a mind as sharp as a palette knife. Showing him my subpar work was a risk, but I was lost. He met me in his private studio on the top floor of the Institute. It was a chaotic, beautiful space filled with half-finished canvases, towering stacks of art books, and the rich, familiar smell of oil paint. He looked at my painting for a long time, his head cocked to one side. He didn't say anything. He just looked. "Technically, it's perfect, Liam," he said finally, his voice gentle. "The brushwork is flawless. The composition is strong. But it's dead. There's no life in it." "Where's the feeling?" I deflated. "I know," I mumbled, staring at the floor. I'm struggling to find it." He looked at me, his gaze kind but probing. "Heard the rumors, son, about you and your roommate. I've been getting the emails. I know you're under a lot of pressure." I felt a flush of shame. "It's complicated." Art is always complicated, he said with a wry smile. It's messy and it's painful and it's glorious. You can't create something real when you're hiding from the truth. He tapped a finger on the lifeless face of the old woman on my canvas, or trying to paint a memory of peace from a place of war. It's a lie. The canvas knows you're lying. He walked over to a blank canvas on his own easel. Art doesn't require perfection, Liam. It requires truth. Your truth. Right now, your truth isn't quiet dignity and gentle sunlight. Your truth is anger. It's chaos. It's conflict. He looked at me, his eyes full of a strange, intense fire. So, my advice to you is this. Stop trying to paint what you've lost. And start painting what you've found. I left his studio feeling more lost and confused than ever. Paint what? You've found. What had I found? Hatred, guilt, fear? How was I supposed to make art out of that? It felt like he was telling me to abandon the collection that had gotten me this far, to throw away the very concept that had made me a finalist. I went back to my studio and stared at the 5 lifeless paintings. They were ghosts, echoes of a person I no longer was. The person who had painted the originals was hopeful, dedicated, maybe a little naive. He believed in finding beauty in the quiet corners of the world. But I wasn't that person anymore. I was a person who had sold his roommate's most prized possession out of spite. I was a person who was consumed by a feud so toxic it had poisoned every aspect of my life. I was a person living in a state of constant paranoid vigilance. There was no quiet beauty in my world anymore. There was only the war. Professor Finch's words echoed in my head. The canvas knows you're lying. He was right. I had been lying. To the canvas and to myself. I had been trying to pretend the last few weeks hadn't happened, that I could. Just go back to who I was before. It was impossible. I looked at the one blank canvas I had left, my last chance. The deadline for submission was in 3 days. I didn't have time to repaint the entire collection. I could submit the 4 dead paintings and the 1 blank one and hope for the best. Or I took a deep breath. It was a terrifying, insane idea. It was career suicide. It went against every instinct I had as a meticulous, careful painter. I walked over to my rack of paints. I didn't reach for the subtle grays or the gentle blues. I grabbed the jar of Mars Black. I squeezed a huge, angry dollop of it onto a clean palette. Then I grabbed the cadmium red, the color of blood and fire, and titanium white / stark and unforgiving. I threw the reference photos of the old woman in the trash. I turned my failed paintings to face the wall. I stood before the blank canvas, my heart hammering in my chest. I wasn't going to paint a hymn. I was going to paint a scream. The next 72 hours were a fugue state. I didn't leave the studio. I didn't sleep. I survived on stale coffee and the stale crackers I found at the bottom of my bag. I worked with a frantic, desperate energy that I had never known before. All the rules I had learned about technique, about composition, about subtlety, I threw them all out the window. This wasn't painting. It was an exorcism. I didn't use brushes. I used palette knives. Regs, my own hands. I smeared the paint onto the canvas, thick and angry. I scraped it away, revealing the layers underneath. The painting became a battlefield of texture and raw emotion. It was a chaotic, abstract explosion of black, white, and red. At the center of the canvas, a grillette, gaping. Black void emerged, representing the empty space where Maya's computer used to be. From one side Yeget, geometric shapes of green. The color of her toxic energy drinks lashed across the canvas, violating the space. On the other side, soft, delicate shapes of blue and yellow, the ghosts of my lost paintings were being consumed by the blackness. Red, the color of our shared rage, splattered across the entire composition like shrapnel. It was ugly, it was violent, it was chaotic. But as Professor Finch had said, it was true. was the most honest thing I had ever painted. It was the inside of my head, my heart, my life made visible. As I worked, something strange happened. The anger, hatred, the paranoia that had been poisoning me for weeks began to recede. With every slash of the palette knife, I was releasing a little bit of it onto the canvas. I was taking the ugliness inside me and putting it somewhere else, was transforming it. The act of creation, which had felt impossible before, was once again becoming my salvation. On the morning of the deadline, I was done. I stood back and looked at the painting, my body aching with exhaustion, my hands stained with paint. It was raw, was unsettling, was completely out of place with the rest of my work, but it was alive. It pulsed with a furious, undeniable energy. Was the best thing I had ever done. I had to give it a title. The other paintings were Laundromat at Midnight, Fire Escape in July, Rain on 3rd Street. This one needed something different, something that told its story. I took a small brush and, in the bottom right corner, I painted the title in neat black letters, An Eye for an Eye. I spent the next hour taking high-resolution photographs of my 5 pieces, the 4 dead soldiers and the 1 screaming newborn. I uploaded them to the Sheridan Grant submission portal with 5 minutes to spare. As I hit submit, I felt a strange sense of peace. I had no idea what the committee would think. They would probably be horrified. They would probably disqualify me for submitting a portfolio that was so wildly inconsistent, but I didn't care. I had told the truth. And for the first time in weeks, I felt free. I went back to the apartment, showered, and fell into bed. I slept for 14 straight hours. When I woke up, the world felt different. The war with Maya was still there, a low hum in the background of my life. It didn't have the same power over me anymore. I had faced the monster, and I had turned it into art. A week later, I got the email. I had been selected as one of the 3 finalists for the Sheridan Grant. My work would be exhibited at the Arden Gallery. I stared at the screen in disbelief. I had to read it 3 times to make sure it was real. They had seen it. They had seen past the deadness of the first 4 pieces, and they had seen the truth in the last one. Oh, maybe they had. Seen the story of an artist who had lost his way and then found it again in the most unexpected way. I felt a surge of elation so powerful it almost knocked me off my feet. I had done it. Against all odds, I had made it. I was a finalist. I had a show. But my elation was quickly tempered by a new, cold wave of fear. An exhibition meant that my work would be on public display. My story would be on public display. And Maya, my nemesis, the master of her own narrative, would not let that go unchallenged. The exhibition wasn't the end of the war. It was the final battlefield. The 2 weeks leading up to the exhibition were a strange mix of exhilaration and dread. On one hand, I was living a dream. I was working with the curators at the Arden Gallery, a sleek, minimalist space with soaring white walls and perfect lighting. Seeing my paintings hanging in a professional gallery, was a surreal, out-of-body experience. They looked important. They looked real. The curators decided to hang An Eye for an Eye in the center of the wall, flanked by the 4 other, quieter pieces. The contrast was jarring and powerful. You could see the artist I had been and the artist I had become. It was a narrative in 5 acts. It's a story of a breakdown and a breakthrough. On the other hand, the truce with Maya had become a heavy, menacing silence. She knew I was a finalist. The list had been published on the university website. She had said nothing. She hadn't congratulated me. She hadn't threatened me. She had simply watched me. I would catch her looking at me with an unreadable expression. It was a predator's patience. She was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that the moment would be. The exhibition itself, my anxiety, was a constant companion. I jumped at every sound. I rehearsed 100 different scenarios in my head. 100 different ways she could try to ruin my big night. Would she show up and cause a scene? Would she plaster the gallery with posters of her tearful video? Would she hire someone to throw green paint on my work? The possibilities were endless, and my imagination was my own worst enemy. The only thing that kept me sane was the work itself. I spent my days at the gallery, talking to the curators, giving interviews to the local art blogs. I was becoming a person of interest. The story of my unconventional portfolio had leaked, and people were intrigued. I was the dark horse, the wild card. The night of the exhibition arrived. It was a cold, clear evening in early December. The gallery was buzzing with people. I saw my professors, my fellow students, a few of my estranged friends who had come out of a sense of obligation or curiosity. I saw the 3 members of the Sheridan Grant Committee wandering through the gallery with clipboards, their faces stern and judicious. I saw Professor Finch, who gave me a slow, encouraging wink from across the room. I was wearing my one good suit, which felt tight and uncomfortable. I felt like an imposter, a kid playing dress-up. I stood in a corner, nursing a glass of cheap sparkling wine, watching people look at my paintings. They would study the quiet street scenes, their expressions appreciative. Then they would get to an eye for an eye. They would stop. They would lean in. Their expressions would change to confusion, then fascination. I could hear them whispering, "What happened there? So angry? I kinda love it." It was working. The story was being told without me having to say a word. I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I could actually win this. Maybe everything would be okay. And then I saw her. She was standing by the entrance of the gallery. She wasn't alone. She was with a man. A short stoatman with nimble fingers and chaos herp, appraising eyes of a pawnbroker. It was Sal, the man who had bought her computer. My blood ran cold. The glass of wine slipped from my numb fingers and shattered on the polished concrete floor. No one noticed. All I could see was Maya, a triumphant, venomous smile playing on her lips. She had found him. She had found my co-conspirator, my witness. She hadn't come to cause a scene. She had come with proof. She had brought my crime to my coronation. She saw me see her. Her smile widened. She said something to Sal, and they both started walking towards me, moving through the crowd with a predatory grace. This was it. The final move, checkmate. They stopped in front of me, right in front of my paintings. Maya didn't even glance at them. Her eyes were locked on mine, glittering with victory. The 3 judges from the Sheridan Committee, drawn by the sudden tension, began to drift closer. Professor Finch was watching, his expression tight with concern. The whole room seemed to be holding its breath. "Liam," Maya said, her voice sweet as poison, "I don't believe you've been formally introduced. This is Sal. He's a businessman. He buys and sells used electronics." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "He was kind enough to sell me back my gaming PC, at a significant markup, of course. But I'm so relieved to have it back." She turned to the judges, who were now standing right beside us. "You know, it's a funny story how I lost it in the first place. My roommate here," she gestured to me, "stole it from our apartment and sold it to this gentleman because I accidentally spilled a drink." A collective gasp went through the small crowd that had gathered around us. One of the judges, a severe-looking woman named Mrs. Dubois, storied at May, her face a mask of horror. "Is this true, Mr. Parker?" Say demanded. This was the moment, the one I had been dreading for weeks. I could lie. I could deny it. I could try to bluff my way out of it. But I was tired of lying. I was tired of the war. I looked at the painting behind Maya's head. An eye for an eye. It was my truth. And my truth was ugly, but it was mine. I took a deep breath and looked Mrs. Dubois straight in the eye. "Yes," aside, my voice clear and steady. "It is." The silence that followed my admission was a physical thing. It pressed in on me, thick and heavy with judgment. Mrs. Dubois looked at me as if I were a piece of filth she had found on the bottom of her shoe. The other two judges looked equally horrified. Maya's smile was radiant. She had won. She had detonated the bomb in the middle of my triumph and vaporized my future. He admitted it, she said to the judges, her voice ringing with theatrical disbelief. He stole my property. He's a criminal. How can you even consider giving him this grant? She turned to Sal. Isn't that right, Sal? He sold you my $6,000 computer for cash. Sal looked uncomfortable. He was a creature of the shadows of discreet transactions. This public spectacle was clearly not his scene. He just grunted and nodded. I looked at the faces around me, at the shocked expressions of my fellow students, the pity in the eyes of my estranged friends, and at Professor Finch, whose face was a mask of profound disappointment. I had let him down. I had let everyone down. The shame was so intense it was a physical pain. But then I looked at my painting, an eye for an eye. It was a painting about this exact moment, about the ugly, messy, complicated truth. I had painted the crime. Now I had to own it. I did sell her computer aside, my voice stronger now. Addressed not just to the judges, but to the whole room, and it was wrong. It was a vindictive, desperate act, and there's no excuse for it. I saw a flicker of surprise on Maya's face. This wasn't the groveling apology she had expected, but that's not the whole story. It's just one half of the equation. I pointed to the painting. That painting is the whole story. That is what this entire fight has been about. It's about that gash of green, the color of the energy drink she poured all over my work. It's about those faint shapes of blue and yellow, the ghosts of the paintings I had spent 6 months creating, the paintings she destroyed, and then called my hobby. This painting is about what happens when you push a person to their breaking point. It's about what happens when someone takes your future from you and feels no remorse. I looked at Maya, really looked at her, not with hatred, wet, astringy, weary clarity. I did a terrible thing, but you did too. You started this war, Maya. I just finished it. And this is what it looks like. The room was silent. No one knew what to say. The narrative was no longer simple. It wasn't victim and villain. It was just two people who had brought out the absolute worst in each other. Mrs. Dubois cleared her throat, her expression still severe. Mr. Parker, the Sheridan Grant is not just about talent. It is about character. It is about representing the future of the artistic community. And you have shown a profound lack of it. She turned to her fellow judges. The committee's decision is clear. Of course, it was over. I had lost. I felt a strange sense of calm. I had stood in the wreckage of my own making, and I had told the truth. There was nothing left to lose. Just as the judges were about to announce their decision, a man stepped forward from the back of the crowd. He was older, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, white acerb, intelligent face. I recognized him from the art magazines. 'Twas Julian Arden, the owner of the gallery, a legend in the art world. If I may? Mr. Arden said, his voice quiet but commanding. The judges turned, surprised by the interruption. I find this entire situation fascinating. He walked up to my painting, studying it with an expert eye. For months, I have looked at art that is technically perfect, but emotionally sterile. Art that is safe. Art that is boring. He turned to face the room. Tonight, I have heard a story. A messy, human, painful story. And I have seen a painting that captures that story with a raw, brutal honesty that I have not seen in a very long time. He looked at me. This painting is not safe. It is not polite. It is the truth. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what real art is all about. He turned to the judges. You can give your grant to whomever you wish. It is your prerogative. But I am giving this artist, Liam Parker, a solo exhibition in this gallery. A real one. 6 weeks, starting in the spring. And I am going to buy this painting. He gestured to an eye for my personal collection. 'Cause it is the most exciting piece of work I have seen all year. The room erupted in whispers. Maya stared at him. Hair motia gepi, her perfect triumphant moment utterly ruined. The judges looked stunned, their decision suddenly rendered almost irrelevant. Professor Finch was looking at me, a slow, proud smile spreading across his face. I was speechless. I couldn't process what had just happened. A solo show at the Arden Gallery. It was more than the Sheridan. It was a dream. The rest of the evening was a blur. The judges officially announced that one of the other finalists had won the grant. I barely heard it. I shook Mr. Arden's hand, mumbled my thanks, and floated through the rest of the night in a daze. People were coming up to me, congratulating me, looking at me with a newfound respect. I wasn't the villain anymore. I was the artist. Later, as the crowd was thinning out, I stepped outside into the cold night air to clear my head. Maya was there, standing alone by the curb, Sal having long since disappeared. She looked small and defeated. She looked at me as I approached. The hatred in her eyes was gone. All that was left was a deep, weary exhaustion that I knew mirrored my own. "So you won," Say sighed, her voice flat. "Congratulations." "I didn't win the grant," I said. "You know what I mean?" Say snapped dead, then sighed. "He's really going to buy that painting?" "I guess so," I said. We stood in silence for a long time, the sounds of the city swirling around us. The war was over. There were no victors, only survivors. "I'm moving out next month," she said finally, not looking at me. "I found a place with some of my teammates. People who get it. That's probably for the best," I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet. I took out all the cash. I had about $200. I held it out to her. "What's that?" she asked. "It's a start," I said, "for the computer. When Mr. Arden pays me for the painting, I'll give you the rest, all of it." "For what Sal charged you?" She stared at the money, then at my face. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Surprise, gratitude. I didn't know. She didn't take the money. "Keep it," She sighed, her voice barely a whisper. Just forget it. Let's just call it even." She turned and walked away down the street, not looking back. I stood there, the money still in my hand, and watched her go. It wasn't an apology, wasn't forgiveness, but it was a truce, a recognition of the mutual destruction we had caused. I had lost the grant, my friends, my peace of mind. I had acted horribly, and I would have to live with the choices I had made. But as I walked back into the gallery, back to my art, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't victory. It was something quieter, something more profound. It was the feeling of a blank canvas, a new beginning, and it was enough.